This morning I'm continuing with my series called Tuning Up the 10, a modern look at the 10 Commandments. If you remember last week, the commandment that I shared was honor your mother and your father, which is actually the fifth commandment, but I shared it on the fourth Sunday because I wanted it to land on Christian Family Sunday or Mother's Day Sunday, so we're flipping it. So today, although it's the fifth week, I'm talking about the fourth commandment. Got it? So the commandment today is remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Let us pray. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our souls be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our light. Amen. I saw a cartoon the other day of a rabbi who was speaking to one of the members of his synagogue. And he was saying to him, if you ever need me, remember, you can always reach me 24/6. The point of the cartoon, of course, was that you can reach him 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, but don't reach him on the seventh day because that's, of course, the Sabbath day, the day that we need to rest and not to work. God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. Or so says our faith story that's found in the beginning of the book of Genesis. And so goes the logic. If a day of rest is needed for God, surely a day of rest is needed for us as well. So it was really no surprise that this principle would make its way into the 10 Commandments, or the top 10 rules of life for followers or believers. From there, it became standard practice. 24/6. You shall work for 6 days, and on the seventh day you shall rest. And not just you, but the commandment says your family and your workers and your laborers and those in your community, those who work for you, leading some to suggest that this is the only commandment that includes a little bit of a social justice element in it as well. The word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Sabbath, which literally translated means simply to stop work. So technically, every coffee break that you take in a day is quite literally a mini Sabbath. But the Sabbath means an entire day to stop work. Again, for those in the Jewish faith, it goes from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. And for those of us in the Christian faith, it's, of course, all day on Sunday. I always joke that this is the one commandment that I consistently break because almost every Sunday for the past 25 years, I have worked on the Sabbath and Christmas and Easter and Mother's Day and Father's Day and Thanksgiving. You know, it's actually kind of funny because I always used to joke that just one year I was going to ask the board if I could have all the holidays of the year off, knowing that they would never, of course, say yes. But be careful what you wish for, because this year, that's actually what kind of happened. As I say, we taped the services ahead of time, so this was the first year that I've ever had Christmas Eve at home. First time I've ever been able to be part of the Easter egg hunt with my kids, even though they're not kids anymore, they're grown up, instead of being out down at the lakeshore freezing for that sunrise service. In some ways, it's been nice, but believe me, I would happily work all the holidays to be able to get to the end of this pandemic. So let me ask you this question. How did this commandment play itself out in your life? Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Was this commandment enforced in your home as a child, for example? Were Sundays truly days for worship and rest? As I said in the opening, those of us over the age of 30 remember when Sundays really were a day of rest, or at least a day with few options as to what you could do. Shopping malls, services all closed, and you were kind of forced to spend the day at home, whether you wanted to or not. The only entertainment was church. Although that being said, I think that the movie theaters were open because I remember having a few heated debates with my dad about whether going to the movies was an appropriate thing to do on a Sunday afternoon. You can guess what side of the argument I was on. But it really was a quiet day. I remember when I was 16, my parents would take me to the parking lot of Woolco on a Sunday afternoon so I could learn how to drive because there were no cars in the parking lot. Again, for those under the age of 30, Woolco was the Canadian version of Walmart before Walmart came along. But this is how it played out in my home. This was my Sabbath growing up. We'd get up on Sunday mornings, put on our church clothes, polish our shoes, and off we would go to church. And then mid-afternoon or so, we would have a big family dinner, usually a joint of pork or lamb. My dad would always ask my mom, are we having a joint for lunch? And my brother and sister and I would crack up thinking that's the funniest thing he could possibly have said. It was kind of a British thing. And then in the evening, after dinner, we would play games or maybe watch a show on TV. It was a nice routine. It was a nice way to end a busy week. The Sabbath in our home was honored, but in a low-key kind of way. And looking back, I really appreciated it. It was more about family time than it was about rest time. Was that like yours? Maybe. But I do know that there are people going to Northwest listening or watching today who grew up in homes where it was a very different story. In some homes back in the day, the Sabbath was strictly enforced. I had a conversation recently with a member here at Northwest, and he was telling me what the Sabbath was like in his home where he grew up. He and his family went to church on Sundays twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. And between the two, you didn't dare pick up a soccer ball or a TV guide or a pack of cards. You could have a Bible in your hand, and that was about it. The Sabbath was the Sabbath, a day for nothing but rest and worship. And you broke it, like any of the commandments, at your own peril. So what happened to this enforced day of rest? Government happened. Our society secularized itself. In 1992, the Ontario government, under the leadership of Barrie, struck down the Sabbath day laws, allowing stores and businesses and clubs to open. And we went from being a 24/6 to a 24/7 society. Other provinces followed suit. I know a lot of folks are watching from New Brunswick, and I believe it was 2002 or 2003 when you had your Sabbath day laws changed. And I remember because we were in Sussex at that time. I remember being interviewed by CTV as to whether I thought it was a good thing to be able to shop on Sunday. And I know the controversy that it caused in our little town of Sussex. We could spend hours debating whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing that we opened up on Sundays. But one thing is for sure, it's a permanent thing. The days of a forced day of rest enshrined by law are a thing of the past. And trying to change that is like trying to get toothpaste back into the tube. It's not going to happen. So all that means is that if we want to find a way to honor this commandment, we're not going to have any help from society. We have to do it ourselves. And maybe that begins by looking at it in a new way, a fresh way. And that's what this is all about. But before we get there, I want to make a point. Let's make a couple of people squirm, but I'm going to make this point anyway. As Protestant Christians, we base a lot of what we believe on two people. Jesus, of course, whose teachings provide the foundation of our faith, and Martin Luther, who back in the 1500s started a movement that became what we know today as the Protestant Church. And for those not familiar with the term Protestant, it means a Christian church not from the Catholic or Orthodox tradition. So United Churches, Presbyterian, Anglican, Baptist, Lutheran, and so forth, these would be considered Protestant churches. Guess what? Neither Jesus nor Martin Luther had a whole lot of time for this commandment. At least, not in the way that it was presented or enforced in their day. They had no problem with the other 9, but not so much the 4th. Let me explain. Jesus quite regularly not only criticized it, but he broke it. And I know I've spoken about this before. But I'm going to put a couple of examples up on the screen just to remind you. Here's the first one. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And he answered, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." Or how about this one? Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked him, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot how they might kill Jesus. So we know what Jesus thought of the enforcement of the Sabbath in his day, but what about Martin Luther? Here's what he said. "Your thinking is that the Sabbath means to do no work, whatever, and to be idle. No, you must not construe the Sabbath in this manner. Sanctifying the Sabbath means to assist your neighbor however you can. For God does not want the Sabbath to be kept holy in such a way that you allow your neighbor to languish and be in need." Wow. So not only is Martin Luther not suggesting that we take Sunday to sit around and do nothing, he's actually encouraging us to use it as a day to help others. So what does that mean? It means if your neighbor asks you to help him or her with their yard work on a Sunday, you can't use the excuse, "Sorry, it's my Sabbath, I can't do any work." You can't allow your neighbor to languish and be in need. So says Martin Luther. I'm teasing about the artwork, by the way. If you want to use this as an excuse, I'll back you up. And please be clear, I'm not suggesting that if Martin Luther or Jesus were to live in Barrie in the year 2021, that you would find them shopping at Walmart on a Sunday morning. But what I mean is that both Jesus and Martin Luther saw a bigger concept to the idea of Sabbath than simply choosing a day to refrain from work or activity. And yet, the principle of Sabbath and rest and balance is so very vital. So what I'm going to do is I want to take about 10 more minutes and completely overhaul the notion of keeping the Sabbath holy. And at the end, you can say, "Yeah, I'm on board with that." Or you can say, "Nah, I like the old way of thinking about it, of having a complete day of rest." To get there, I want to take you on a little field trip. At the end of Ann Street here in Barrie, where it connects with Carson Road, there is the beginning of a trail. The trail goes into the forest. I've spoken about this trail often. I walk on it, I run on it, but at least once a week to once every 10 days, when the weather's good, I start down the trail, take a ride into the forest rather than staying on the main trail. I walk down a very steep slope around a bend and then walk for about 10 minutes deeper into the forest. And eventually I come to an old log that is shaped almost like a chair. I brush the log off and I sit down on it. I take about 10 minutes and I just breathe deeply and take in the experience that is all around me. I do the 5 senses meditation. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this or tried it. It's pretty cool. What I do is I focus for a moment on each of my senses. I begin with sight. What can I see from where I'm sitting? This week I saw trilliums. Some weeks of the year I see orange leaves. Sometimes buds, sometimes just skeleton branches. And then I listen. It's amazing how many sounds come from the forest when you are completely still. Then I smell. Every season in the forest has its own unique smell. Touch. I feel the log that I'm sitting on. Or I take a handful of dirt from the floor of the forest and just let it run through my fingers. And finally taste. I don't eat anything from the forest, but it's more focusing than just on breathing in the air that is around me. The goal of the 5 senses meditation is to be fully present wherever you are. You should try it. Excuse me. Even at home. And then after I've done the 5 senses meditation, I take out my phone, which can also be used these days as a modern diary. And then I make notes into my phone of what's going on in my head and what's going on in my heart. Because when you settle your senses and you are fully present, it's amazing what your mind and what your heart, what kind of thoughts and ideas will come to the surface. I make a few notes, and then I offer a little prayer of thanks, and I go on my way. 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. It could be a Friday morning, a Tuesday afternoon, a Saturday evening, it doesn't matter. But it's my time. And this is a spiritual practice that's really helped me. I want to introduce a word to you this morning, and I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can see it and read it yourself. The word is nuach. Let's say it 3 times together, and so you can begin to get it into your head. Nuach, nuach, nuach. It's also a Hebrew word, and it's also found in the book of Genesis. But a little further along, after the story of God creating the world in 6 days and then resting on the 7th, which we call the Sabbath, if you go a little further into Genesis, you get to a second creation account, the account of God creating Adam and Eve. It says God created Adam and Eve and placed them in the Garden of Eden. And then it says, the 3 of them rested. This is called nuach, which literally means to settle or to rest with God. Nuach, to settle or to rest with God. I don't know about you, but to me, that's a very different idea from Sabbath. It's one thing to stop working. It's another thing to settle or rest with God. Nuach isn't always an organized or set time of a day, but it's more like taking advantage of settling moments when they come your way. I read this cute little illustration the other day by a woman named Althea Lindstrom. I think it kind of gets to this a little bit. One spring morning, I paused beside a park fountain to watch the spray diffuse sunlight into shimmering rainbows. A young mother, followed by a tiny blonde girl, came hurrying along the path. When the child saw the fountain, she threw her arms wide. "Mommy, wait," she cried. "See all the pretty colors?" The mother reached for her daughter's hand. "Come on," she urged, "we're going to miss our bus." Then, seeing the joy on the small face, she relented. "All right," she said, "there'll be another bus soon enough." And she settled down to enjoy the experience. I believe that the modern world, at least our modern world, has lost the notion of Sabbath. And we can mourn that, or maybe we can flip a few pages along in the Bible and discover or rediscover the concept of nuach. Again, nuach doesn't require a day. Maybe all it requires is a log in the middle of the forest, or a moment of watching rainbow colors in a fountain. Settling moments. Our souls, our spirits hunger for these kind of experiences. Jesus once said this: "What does it profit a person if they gain the entire world but lose their soul?" Sadly, our modern industrialized 24/7 world is not structured in a way that is meant to feed our souls. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. Our souls can so easily get lost in the world today, so easily get distracted. And I think that's because a lot of us just don't know how to feed them. The easy way out is to blame the world or the government. Well, it's no wonder. Look at the state that we're in. We're on the go all the time. Back in the day when the world would shut down for a day in the week for the Sabbath, we were so much healthier. We were forced to stop. We've all heard that argument. Maybe we've all made that argument. But is it really true? Because if that logic is true, then we should all be happier and healthier than we were 14 months ago. Because 14 months ago, the world, for many of us, took a permanent Sabbath. Are we happier now than we were then? I don't think so. And I know there are many reasons why we're not happier. I'm really oversimplifying it for my purpose. But if Sabbath were as simple as having lots of time, this should be heaven on earth. And we all know that it's not. One thing the pandemic has taught me is that the key to spiritual growth is not time as much as it is practice. It's not so much what we need to stop doing as to what we need to start doing. It's not Sabbath as much as it's nuach, the ability to settle, to rest with God. Let me give you another example. George Santayana, who was a very famous philosopher and writer, former professor at Harvard University, was once giving a lecture, and he paused in mid-sentence, and he looked at a beautiful, brilliant yellow forsythia bush blooming outside of the window. Many long seconds passed, and finally he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I fear that last sentence will never be completed. You see, I have an appointment with April." And he left the room. Do you have a spiritual practice that allows you to settle with God? If you do, I'd love to hear about it. For me, it's the forest every time. In fact, I read a great quote the other day that said this: "A walk in nature walks the soul back home." A walk in nature walks the soul back home. It's beautiful. And I can't help but think that Jesus and Martin Luther both understood this principle, especially Jesus. Frankly, I don't think Jesus could care less if you plucked grain on the Sabbath, healed someone on the Sabbath, went to the park and played soccer on the Sabbath, helped your neighbor on the Sabbath, even picked up a few items at Walmart on the Sabbath. That's not what makes for a healthy spiritual life or healthy spiritual people. That just makes good rule followers. How do we know this about Jesus? Because time and time again, and we heard Catherine read about this, time and time again it said that when Jesus was overwhelmed or stressed out or worried or needed a break, he would withdraw by himself to a quiet place. He would practice nuach. He would settle, rest with God. The series is called Tuning Up the 10. So what do you think? Are you on board with tuning up this commandment? You can still keep the Sabbath holy and do whatever it means to keep that day holy to you, even if the world ignores it. Or if it helps you to think of it in a fresh way, maybe switch from remembering the Sabbath and keep it holy to remember to practice nuach and keep your spirit holy. Whatever that means to you. Sitting on a log in the forest, practicing the 5 senses meditation, reading scripture on your back porch, having a date with April, enjoying the colors of a rainbow in the fountain. Whatever feeds your spirit, whatever allows you to regain your soul and to settle into the presence of God. A woman by the name of Myra Mathers, and I'm going to end with this, tells the story of driving one day on a business trip. She had to drive through the mountains of Western Canada. It was late afternoon. She heard a clunk, and her car stopped going. She was far away from anything or anyone. She waited, but no cars passed by her. She got out her cell phone and she called her husband. He wasn't home. She left this desperate message: "Dave, I'm stuck on a mountain road. The car is broken down. I'm all alone, and a snowstorm is starting. I need help." She put her phone in her pocket, and then she noticed a driveway up ahead that wound its way to what looked like a small home. She started down the driveway and indeed came to a quaint-looking cottage. Just before she knocked on the door, she called her husband again. She left another message, even more panicked. "Dave, help me. I'm stuck on the mountain road, and now I'm knocking on some random person's door. The storm is getting worse. I'm very worried." She put the phone in her pocket, and she knocked tentatively on the door. After a moment, it was opened by a very kindly-looking couple. She explained her situation. They told her that they would be happy to drive her to town and get her some help, but not tonight. The storm was getting too bad, and they didn't want to drive. They said she was welcome to stay with them for the night. She didn't have much choice, so she thanked them for their kind offer. She tried to pay them, but they wouldn't take any money. They then said that they had a guest house that she could stay in. They led her along a path to a little cabin. Inside was a couch, a cozy bed, and a huge window that overlooked the mountain stream below. The man then turned on a switch and a fire miraculously bubbled up from the fireplace. They left her to get settled and then invited her for supper. Myra sat on the side of the bed and noticed a Bible on the coffee table. She picked it up. It was marked at Psalm 139. She started to read these words: "Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I rise up and when I sit down, and are acquainted with all my ways. You hem me in behind and before. Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in the earth, you are there. If I travel to the farthest limits of the sea, even there, your hand will hold me." She sank into the chair, picked up her phone, and with a heart filled with gratitude, made one more call. "Dave, I'm staying at a cottage in the mountains. It is snowing outside, but I'm fine. Come tomorrow. Right now, God and I are resting comfortably. Remember the nuach and keep it holy." Amen.